Mark for the building. Let's get started. Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
yeah.
No, I can't hear you.
Oh,
One second.
you're gurgling actually a bit.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. He's up to Hilgul Gemara. Shalosh Asheira is saying. So yesterday we learned about the three houses and how we discharged the Israel of Avodah Zara and about the three stones. So now we're learning about Shalosh Asheris. There's three types of Asherah trees. Elon Shanotim Etchila L'Shem Avodas Kacham. An Elon that was originally planted as an Avodah Zarah. That's a regular Asheira, Haresu Asura. That's Asur, and it has to be burnt. Gidai Upisle L'Shem Avodah Kacham. What if you had an existing tree that was not planted L'Shem Avodah Zarah? And what you did is you pruned it and trimmed it because you wanted, as Rashi says, anything that grows in the future to be an Asherah, to be served, and then the hechlif, and it grew new shoots. Noitel mashe hechlif, whatever grew is asher outside Zara, and that has to be taken away. Hamid tachta avodas kochavim, but not. What if you just put a getchka underneath the tree, but not done anything to the tree? Then harezu muteris, that does not asher the tree. So there's a very interesting Tosfos over here. But first, let's talk about Tosfos, Rashi. Rashi says, "Gidoi ovid kechavim or Yisrael lavodis kechavim." Either a yid or a goy trim this tree. Serch avodah zara lavoid hagadul sheyidula b'me'ata. So Rashi says your intent was, or the intent of the person pruning the tree, was not to serve the extant tree. It's because they only want to serve the new growth that will grow out of the tree. This plant, this tree was already in existence. So Rashi makes it very clear that the discussion that we're having is not about the etzem tree. We're discussing where your only kavanah was that the new growth should be in Avodah Zarah. It's mashma that if when I trimmed the tree, I wanted the etzem tree to become Asher al Avodah Zarah, it would become Asher al Avodah Zarah. Only reason why the etzem tree isn't becoming Asher al Avodah Zarah is because my das, when I trim the tree, is only that the new growth should be in Avodah Zarah. So in one of the rare cases, we see that Tosfos, instead of arguing on Rashi, Tosfos gives Rashi a haskama. So let's just look to Tosfos on this Mishnah, which is actually found on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis. So I'm just going to pop the Mem Zayin Amud Beis for a second, and we're going to look at that Tosfos, because Tosfos says a cute lashon that you don't typically see in Tosfos. So I'm going to look down towards the bottom. This is a Tosfos that's out of place, but it's the first Tosfos after the wide lines in Tosfos. Gidloi upasloi lavoid skachavim. Pirish akuntris lavoid bigidulim sheyigdulu me'ata. The reason why you trimmed the tree is because you wanted to serve the new growth that will grow from this tree moving forward. Rashi specifically says that his intent is only to make the new growth into Avodah Zarah, not the existing tree. And here's the interesting line: Rashi is pshat. Usually Tosfos quotes Rashi and attacks him. Here Tosfos quotes Rashi and he says v'yafakivein. Tosfos gave Rashi a skama. Rashi said good pshat. Why? If when they trim the tree, they have in mind that they want the ikr tree to become their avodah zarah. Everyone would agree that it would be aser. I was not planted lechatchila for avodah zarah. Even though the Elon is mechuber, even she'asa ma'isa b'kufa Elon, since you did a mice in the guf ilan by pruning it, by trimming it, dumya the offer the chafer baboris shicha the ma'arois senasar. It's similar to other karka that you can answer by digging into it. When you do a mice in the guf of the item, you could answer it also by the Zara, even though it's mechuber. That's an interesting choice. So let's go back to our Mishnah. Okay. Dr. Helen Gemor. Amri Tevei Rabbi Yani, who shehivrech v'hirkev b'gufa shalila. Just proclaiming the new growth as a Avoda Zara does not answer it. You have to do a significant ma'aseh. You have to graft. You have to graft into this tree. As Rashi says, either it's grafting or replanting one of the branches by pulling it down to the ground. That's only if from this branch is where the new growth came from. There and only there is it also by Zara. Is now whatever grows out of this branch that you grafted or that you pulled under the ground to replant, that's specially planted for a purpose of a Zara. If it's like push-up shot of the Mishnah, that you just trimmed it and now a new sprout grew out of it, that would not become usher to Avoda Zara. That is what Rabbi Yanai said. That's not what our Mishnah says. Now. Our Mishnah says a much less significant Maisa will be able to designate future growth as a Avoda Zara. All you need to do is prune it and trim it. You don't have to do something so drastic as grafting or planting a branch into the ground. Similar to what the Gemara said on previous Mishnah, we're not talking about how it becomes Osir. Of course, even Gidoy Pislai makes it Osir. But here the Chiddush is, the Afagav, the Hivrich, the Hirkev, the Guv Shalilam, even if you did such a significant Maisa that you grafted into the tree, or you took a branch of the tree, bent it down and pulled it up again. So now it's growing like a new tree. Nevertheless, Kinotol Mashahichlev Shapradami. You would think that answers the whole tree. That even there, all you have to do is take off the new growth, and the tree remains mutter. Why? The Maldatema, you might have thought, Kivan the Hivrich, the Hirkiv, the Gufa Shal Ilan. Since you did such a significant mice and the Gufa Ilan, it's ki Ilan Shatat Shanatai Metchila Dami. It's like you planted a new tree specifically for the purpose of an Avoda Zara. And if that was the case, the Litzer Kula and the whole tree would be also Kamash Malan, that not. Okay, now before we go weiter, we have to remind ourselves of a machloikis that we had a couple of days ago in a Mishnah. And if you remember, the Mishnah was discussing on Asheira. And the Mishnah says that it says Alaharim Elohehem, Eloharim Elohehem. We learned that if you bow down to a mountain, you're not going to answer the mountain. But you will answer anything that's on the mountain. Because the Mishnah quoted the pasuk was Sachmor Kesed Zav Asher Aleim, and from there we learn that anything that's on that mountain is going to be also for the Avodah Zara. But the mountain itself, which is mechuber, is not. And then Rabbi Yosy really added, and he said, "Al-Har Melahayim, Al-Har Melahayim, the mechuber lakarka doesn't become also Avodah Zara." The Gemara probed, what is the difference between Rabbi Yosy and the Chum? In what prat are they arguing? So the Gemara suggested that they're arguing about an ilan shenata ilubsayvavzai. Everybody agrees it's an Asheira if the tree was originally planted for an Avodah Zara. But what if the tree was planted as a regular tree, and only later on you were over it? That's where there's a shayla that has the din of an Asheira. And if you remember, the Gemara said there that Rabbi Yosy Glili is the one in our Mishnah who holds it would be Aser, and the Tanakama would hold it wouldn't be Aser. The Gemara said that Rabbi Yossi Shita is consistent with the Shita of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, and the Gemara quoted a brisa where Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda said that Elon Shenotai Ulubsoif Ovdoi becomes ulcer, and the Gemara, if you remember, the brisa said, where does he know it from? It's from Asheira Tisrufun Beish. Gemara asked, how do you see that from there? Maybe that you need to tell you that a regular Asheira that was planted lichatchila for the purposes of an Avoda Zara. Maybe that's Vasheirem Tisrufim Beish. So the Gemara said true, but there's another pasuk of Vasheirem Tegadeim, which means you should cut it, you should trim it. And Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda learns from there is that if you originally planted not Avoda Zara, and then you started serving it for Avoda Zara, Tegadeim, you have to cut off only the branches that are new, that grew since you started doing oibid. But the ikar tree is going to be no problem. That Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says that the tree that was already there, that you started serving, that it becomes asur and you have to destroy it, that's only referring to the new growth. The Gemara then asked, so what is the Rabbanan to do with the new pasuk? So the Gemara brought in new things. It's to tell you when you come into Eretz Yisrael, what you're supposed to do first. Before you fight the war, you have to damage the Avoda Zara. And the Gemara goes back and forth. So how does Rabbi Yossi know it? How does Rabbanan know it? And that was the sugya over there. I'm bringing that up because it's going to be very relevant momentarily. So Amar Shmuel, Hamishtachav Ilam, if someone bows down to a tree, Tois V'sei, anything that grows after he bows down to the tree, Asura will become also. Which seems like just bowing down without any mice at all. Our Mishnah says, frankly, more our Mishnah says that you have to do something. Mesef Abalozer, Gidoy Upisloi, Lavoid Kechavim, V'hichlav. Our Mishnah says, if you trim the tree because you want to make the future growth into Avoda Zara, the hichlav, and there was future growth, Noidl Masha Hichlav, all you do is cut what you added. But what does our Mishnah tell us? Gidoy Upisloi in, only if you did a Maisa to trim the tree, cover the Avoda Zara, that's when it asers the new growth. But loy gidoy upisloi, if you didn't do this trimming, you just bow down to it, loy, it would not be an Avoda Zara. So it seems like our Mishnah is shver on Shmuel, because Shmuel says merely bowing down without any trimming will render this tree asura. Amalach Shmuel, Zokmar, it's not a kash on Shmuel. You know what Shmuel would answer you if he was here? He would have said, Hamani Rabbonani. Our Mishnah is going according to the Rabbanon. Our Rabbanon hold that once you plant a tree, it doesn't become an Asheira anymore. So if you wanted future growth to be an Asheira, you wanted to make it into an Avoda Zara, you had to have trimmed the tree. Ushmuel Omar, and Shmuel's halacha, that merely bowing down to a tree will answer it, it's Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, the Omar Elon, Shenatoi Ulubasayf Avdai Osir. So we just discussed the machlokes where Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda holds Elon Shenatoi Ulubasayf Avdai is Osir. That's who Shmuel's paskin like. He's paskin like Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, therefore merely bowing down to the tree makes the tree Osir alto the Asheira. The Rabbanan holds once the tree is planted and growing, you can't just serve it and make it into an Avoda Zara. However, it's up to our Mishnah, if you actually trimmed it so that future growth should be Avoda Zara, that in fact would answer the tree. That's how the Gemara wanted to, for Emperor Shmuel. The our Mishnah is going according to the Rabbanan, and Shmuel is going according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. Maskefula Rabashi. So Rabashi asked Akasha, why would you make Shmuel be totally in a machlokes Tanoim and limit his shita to only be going according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda? Mimai. And now the Gemara wants to rewrite the pshat in the Gemara that we said earlier. So just to review, what we said earlier was Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, even though in the words of the Mishnah, if you remember, the words of the Brach where he was quoting, in order to support his psak, that in order to support a psak that's also osir, he quoted a pasuk of Asherim Tisra from Beish, and the Gemara said it's Imlay Nemar Kamar. You only need the Asherim Tisra from Beish to tell you that an Asher that was planted lechatchila is also banos an Asher tree and has to be burnt. But where does he know that even if it was originally planted and then it became an Avodah? That's from a different puzzle that's not even quoted in his brisa. That's from Asher Tegadeh. So Zok to Gemara, how do you know that you have it right? How do you know that you know Pshat? Now, what was Pshat? We learned that if it's Elon Shanatoi, Lumsaif Avdai, Kula Alma Moida, everybody agrees that the initial tree is not going to become Asur Bana. The whole discussion between Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda and the Rabbanan was about the growth. Maybe we should revisit that. Mimaid Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda for Rabbanan, B'toyos speaking, who said that the whole machlokes between the Yosy Bar Yehuda and the Rabbanan is only about the extra growth, but it's assumed that the original tree for sure doesn't become Asur Bana. Maybe we need to revisit that. And maybe Dilma Toisvis L'Divra Kol Asur. Maybe everybody agrees that any new growth that grows is Asur Banoah. Everybody agrees to that, which means that would fit very nicely according to Shmuel. Uve Ikroi Pli. And maybe the whole machlokes between Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda and the Chachamim about Elon Shenatay L'B'Seif Avdai, maybe that's a discussion if even the existing tree becomes Asur Banoah. And let's suggest Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda suffer Ikroi Nami Asur. When Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda says that the Asher is even Nasser, if Natai and then Avdai, is referring even to the base of the tree that was there from before. And where do we know it from? The Chsiv Asheira and Tisra from Beish, which is the pasuk that Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda quotes in the Brisa. Rabban and Safri, Iker Elon Shari. They hold the tree itself is going to be mutter. It's only the growth that's going to be also. Tichsiv Ashereim Tegadeo. So instead of saying that Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda is using the pasuk of Asherein Tegadeo to tell me that the extra growth becomes Asur, let's say everybody agrees that the extra growth is Asur, and it's the Rabbanon who are using the pasuk of Asherein Tegadeo to tell us that the root of the tree, the original tree, is going to remain mutter, because that's what Asherein Tegadeo means. Trim it, meaning the original is mutter and the growth is Asur. Ezo Elon Shekidui Asur Vikri Shari. What type of tree is the only the new growth is also, but the original tree is mutter. Have a that's an Elon Shenatoi Ula B'Seif Avdai. So that's the pshat in Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda. Frank Gemara, and if that's the case, then Shmuel fits in according to everybody. When Shmuel said if you bow down to a tree, it becomes Asur, everybody agrees that the new growth is Asur, and he's referring to the new growth. So to Gemara, if you're going to tell him you're going to want to tell me that that's not how we learned Pshat a couple of blot ago. A couple of blot ago, we learned Pshat that everybody agrees that the main tree is mutter, and the Homa Chlosh Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda and the Chum are only if the additional growth is also. So we could learn differently. Epoch Rabbanon was Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda. With Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda Rabbanon. Earlier we said that it was Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda who was using the pasuk of Ashereim Tegadeon to tell us that the new growth is also. And it was the Chachamim who only learned it from Asheira and Tisra from Beish. Well, let's flip it around. Let's say it's the Chachamim who are learning it out of Asheira and Tegadehon, and it's Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda who holds you learning it out of Asheira and Tisra from Beish. And if you remember, that won't be a problem because the words that Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda quoted to support the Shita is Asheira and Tisra from Beish. So maybe that's how you learn. Evich Rabbanan Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda, Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda and the Gemara elaborates. Lirabanon. No, I'm sorry. So Zok Gemara in Cain, if that's the case, Gidai upislaiman katani. So now the problem is going to be, okay, you've explained Shmuel because now everybody agrees the new growth is awesome. But how are we going to explain our Mishnah? What does our Mishnah say? In Cain Gidai upislai. Our Mishnah says Gidai upislai. Then the new growth will be usher, but the main tree remains mutter. Man Katanila, who would you attribute this Mishnah to? Based on your new understanding of the Machlokes Rabbanan and Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda, our Mishnah here is Loy Rabbanan for Loy Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda. It wouldn't be consistent with either one of the Tanoim that discussed this matter. Rabbanan, if you want to suggest that it's going according to the Rabbanan, well, what we're learning now is Shmuel holds on to Rabbanan, and merely bowing down to the tree will answer the new growth. So below Gidoyu Pislay Nami, Toisus Asura. The new growth is also once you bow down to the tree, even if you didn't modify it. So the Rabbanon will not be consistent with their mission. And if you want to say it's Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, he holds Iker Ilanami Yosser. He holds that when you modify the tree, you trim it, L'kavod Avodah Zara, it makes the whole tree, even the original tree, Yosser. And our Mishnah clearly says that only the new growth becomes Yosser. So we can for this very easily. We can explain the Mishnah according to the Rabbanon and resolve the issue that we just asked. That according to Shmuel, the Rabbanon would hold even below Gidei Pisl. We can answer that kasha. And we could also answer the kasha of Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda that Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda holds that the Iker Ilan is Asur according to this pshat. So let's see how we can explain this according to Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda. Kikam Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda. You know when Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda says that the Iker Ilan would become Asur, that's if you merely bow down to it, like Shmuel says. Beloy Gidayu Pisla. That if it was Loy Gidayu Pisla, then Iker Ilan Asur. Then Iker Ilan would be Asur. Then that's Bistama. If you bow down to it. Avo Gidayu Pisla. The fact that you did a mice in it, you know what that shows? That's Goli Adaite, the Betoisus Nikolai, be Iker Ilan Loy Nikolai. If someone bows down to a tree, that would indicate that he wants to be over the whole tree. And that's why, in fact, Rabbi Yosy would be Moscow. Our mission is speaking in a case where a guy specially trimmed it. If he's specially trimming it, he's showing that I don't want the original tree to be my Avodah Zara. I only want the new growth to be my Avodah Zara. That's why in our Mishnah, only the new growth is Asrat Avodah Zara. Because in the way he designated his tree to the Avodah Zara, it was Goli Adaite, he's showing that it's only trying to serve the new growth and not the Iker tree. And that would be very consistent with our Mishnah. However, Ibais and the Rabbanon, you could even say that our Mishnah would be consistent with the Rabbanon. That Gidai Upislai Utztrichalei. The question was, in the Rabbanon, why did the Mishnah pick a case of Gidai Upislai merely bowing down to the tree would answer it according to Shmuel? Zok to Gemara, there's a special reason why the Mishnah said the case of Gidei Pislai. Because Tolkadat Chamina, even the Oil Emaisa Begufei, Iker Ila Nami Litzer, since you actually did something to the tree itself, you trimmed it, you might think that the main Elon should become Usher as well. Kamash Valanon. So now we have a new pshat in Rabbi Machlekes Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, the Rabbanon, where Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda holds the whole tree is Usher, and the Rabbanon holds the growth is Usher, but the whole tree is not Usher. And this way Shmuel fits in good. Sai according to Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, Sai according to the Rabbanon, that when you bow down to a tree, it answers. When you bow down to the tree, it answers the new growth. Everybody agrees it answers the new growth. And how it would fit into our Mishnah, our Gemara comes up with a solution that would make our Mishnah consistent, side with Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda and side with the Rabbanon. Okay, let's talk to more about it. Ezehi Asheira. What is an Asheira? Fact Rashi, like hello, we just had a Mishnah that discusses three types of an Asheira. So what is the Gemara? What is the Mishnah looking for now? So now what the Gemara is looking for is how do you spot an Asheira? Any tree that's in a land that a goyim used to own, goyim used to occupy, is that automatically considered an Asheira? There's got to be some indication as to which tree the goy serves, and therefore would be also. If they have getchkas underneath it, that would be an indication that this tree was an avodah zara. Reb Shimon says, Kol any tree that they serve, even if it doesn't have a getchka underneath it. There was a story in the city of Sidon. The goyim were serving as an avodah zara a tree. And they found a pile of rocks underneath the tree. Reb Shimon told him, Bitku as Hagal has that. I want you to check through this pile of rocks. Uvatku, and they checked. V'nimtza by tzura, and they found the getchka there. Omer lahen, so he told them, Hoil ulutzura in oivdim, nater leneseila. Clearly, when they have a getchka under the tree, unlike the Tanakama, who says that indicates that the tree is the avodah zara, Fakir, if there's a getchka under the tree, it's the getchka that was the avodah zarah, and the tree is not avodah zarah. So therefore, Zok Reb Shimon, it's only an Asheira if they serve the tree itself, not if they serve as a getchka underneath the tree. Zok to Gemara, Ezel Asheira. What do you mean Ezel Asheira? Oh, see, I was the Gemara. I mixed it up. I thought it was Rashi. Ezel Asheira. V'anan, we just learned a minute ago. Shalosh Asheira is Shalosh Asheira is not. Zok to Hachi Gemara. Shtayim L'divrei Aklel. Everybody holds. So now, I'm sorry. Now the kasha is not White asking this question. Now the Gemara's kasha is. Now we have a third version of an Asheira. We have a third version of an Asheira, where you bow down to getchkas underneath the tree or tree itself. So Zok to Gemara, Hachikamar, Stein L'divrei Aklel. Two ways of making an avodah zarah everybody agrees with, but for achas machloikis Reb Shimon v'Rabbanan. One of the Asheiras mentioned in the previous Mishnah of serving. The first case of the Mishnah, it says if you have an Asheira that they planted they're serving as an avodah zarah, that's an Asheira. Well, that telling the machloik is exactly what they have to do to indicate that they are serving it. The machloik is where Reb Shimon and Chuma argue about whether it's an Asheira. It's called sheyesh tachteh avodas gadol. If you find an Asheira tree or a tree that you think might be an Asheira tree, and you find the getchka underneath it, the Chachamim hold that would be an Asheira. But Reb Shimon argued. Reb Shimon said, "Kol she'ovdin oisah." The only type of Asheira trees, if there's no other getchkas there, it's clear that they're serving just the avodah zarah. Eza hi Asheira stam. How if you stam walk up to a tree, how are you going to know if it's an avodah zarah? Amarav kol shekayim yoshvin tachteha ve'intoimim be'persa. If you ever see a tree that there's priests sitting around it, but they're refusing to eat from its pears, that would definitely be an indication that they are being oived as an avodah zarah. So Rashi tells us that this Ezra Asher Stam has nothing to do with the previous discussion in the Gemara. It's just a new thing telling people how you can tell when you come into a city if this tree might be an avodah zarah. Different signs. So one sign is if you have priests sitting underneath it and they refuse to eat from its pears, that would indicate that this was an avodah zarah. Shmuel Amar, Afilu Amri Hani Tamri Levei Nitzrafi also. Even if they weren't sitting underneath the tree, they just said that the fruits of this tree go to the getchka of Beinitzrafi, that would be also as well. The Rami Beishechra, Vishasile B'Yameda. Because they take what they do is they put these dates into beer, and they use this beer to drink on the day of the special Yom Tov for this getchka. So that would indicate that this is an Asher as well. Omar Memer, Omar Sabi de Pumadisa. The elders of Pumadisa told me that Hilchos of Shmuel, the apostle like Shmuel, that even if priests are talking about a tree, saying that the dates are going to be used for the avodah zarah, that would make the tree into an Asherah tree. Okay, let's turn over and learn Daf Mem Ches on the base. You're not allowed to sit in the shade of an Asherah tree. But if you sat in its shade, tahar, you will be tahar. You won't be considered as having sat in an oil mace. You shouldn't walk underneath this tree. But if you walked right underneath the tree, Tomei, then one is Tomei. It's as if he was sitting in the oil hames. Rashi says because they for sure had some takruvas of avodah zarah there, which is considered sifchei mesim, and you walked under an oil that had what's considered a mace inside. What if you had an Asherah tree that was encroaching on Rosh Hashanah? Its canopy was leaning over onto Rosh Hashanah, so you can't really help walking underneath it. Then you will not be tummy. So clearly, this is a tummy midirabana with an asmachta from a pasuk. Therefore, they weren't gosher tumah if you're in Rosh Hashanah and the Asherah tree is encroaching on the Rosh Hashanah. You're not allowed to sit in the shade of a tree. Shita, of course you're not allowed to. You're having hana from an Isser hana. Amar Rabbi Babachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Nitzrucha Ela L'Tseil Tzila. What is Tseil Tzila? Tseil Tzila is in the late afternoon or early morning, people's shadows are very, very long because the sun's at an angle. It's not right overhead. And if you look at a shadow, you're going to see that sometimes you're walking down the street and there's a long shadow. Your shadow becomes very long. Usually, the amount of distance of the shadow from your body, that's the height of your body. So you're 6 feet high, up to 6 feet from your body, it's a much deeper shadow. Once you're past 6 feet from your body, even though the shadow might extend to 10 feet, to 20 feet, it's a much lighter shadow. That's Seil Tila. So you're not even in it, you're in its shadow, but in its extended shadow. That's what it means. Even Seil Tila, the Chetchila, you're not allowed to sit in it because you're benefiting slightly from the shade of the tree. Michlal, it's mashma, the Betzel Kaimasa. If you were mamish in its shade, even though you weren't under its canopy, im yashav tamei, you would be tamei. But the problem is, the Mishnah says dafke im over tachteha, not sitting in its shade. Zot Gemara, loy dafilu l'tzel kemasa nami im yashav tar. Even if you sit under its shade, even though you're not directly under its branches, you're off to the side. Even if you sat under its shade, you would be tar because you're not under its canopy. The chiddush of our Mishnah is that afilu l'tzel tzila lo yeshiv. The chiddush is that lechatchila you're not allowed to sit even under extended shade. But Avoda, even if you sat under its shade, you would not become tamid unless you were actually under its branches. There are those who look at the Sefer and start from there. It says in the Sefer of him Yoshav Tahar. If you sat in the sail of a tree, Tahar, you're not Tomei. Pshita, why would you be Tomei? You're not under the canopy of the tree. The chiddush is that even if you sit under the shade itself, even under the shade itself, you're not allowed to sit. So it says v'myashav tar. Even if you sit under the shade itself, you're not going to be tamei. Michlal the afilu chetchila yeshiv. So if you're telling me that the sefer that says if you sat your tahor is referring to tzila, it's mashma that the tzeil tzila you could even sit there lechatchila. So that's not what you should be medayik from the Mishnah. What you should be medayik is hakam ashalon dafilu tzeil kemasa im yoshav tar. The chiddush is that even if you sat under its shade, you're tar. But Avoda, it's also even to sit under the extended shade. You should not walk under this tree, and if you did, you will become tamei. My time up, because it's impossible that there's not some remnant of some sacrifice that they sacrifice for this carbon, which has the din of a mace, as we'll soon see. And if you're walking under an oil that has a mace in it, you become tamei. Mani, who's it going according to? Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseri. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseri Aimer, Minayin that Terkuvas Avodah Zecham Mishamitana Ba'oil. How do we know that Terkuvas Avodah Zecham are Mitana Ba'oil? Shenemar v'yitzdu l'balpar v'yoichlu zivchei mesim. We consider sacrifice to in Avodah Zara as zivchei mesim, ma'meis Mitana Ba'oil, after Terkuvas Avodah Zecham Mitana Ba'oil. Now, of course, this isn't a Deraisa, this is a Derabanan with an asmachta on this pasuk, that it's a Derabanan, therefore they say that if the tree extends into Rosh Hashanah and it's encroaching on Rosh Hashanah, their walking underneath it would not make you tamei. What does the Mishnah say? If by mistake you walked under a tree that was leaning over into Rosh Hashanah, you won't be tamei? Or is it saying Ovar lechatchila? Or is it saying Ovar lechatchila? You're allowed to walk under that tree without any issue, since it's encroaching under Rosh Hashanah. So Ovar, is it b'di eved? If you walked under, you're not tamei. Or Ovar, is it telling you lechatchila you're allowed to walk under this tree? Omar Ovar. It's a lechatchila you're allowed to walk underneath there. Rabbi Yochanan Omar im Ovar. It's not even a machlokes. If there's no other way, well, of course, there's always another way. If there's no other reasonably normal distance way where it's not too much out of your way, then if there's no other way, then you're allowed to walk underneath the tree. But if there is a derech achrina, if you had an alternate route, then you shouldn't walk there anyway. But if you did, you won't be tummy. Omer le Rav Sheshes l'shamei. Rav Sheshes told his shamus. Now Rav Sheshes was blind, so he needed his shamus to guide him wherever he walked. And he told him, "He matas lahasam. When you get to this known Asheira tree that they had to walk by, or hit me, run with me, take me quickly." Hechidami. Why would he do that? If there was no other way to go, Lamaler hit me. You don't have to run. Mishra Shari. We just learned that it's mutar lechatchila. And if there was another route that he could have taken, Ki Amar Arhitri Mishari. Running doesn't help. Lechatchila, you're not allowed to go there. There was no other way. You had to go there. So then your question is, why did he have to run? The Adam Chashav Shiny. Reb Sheshes wasn't just a regular person, he was a Chashav Rov. So even though a regular person could stroll normally there, but an Adam Chashav has to rush that he should get out of there as quickly as possible. You're allowed to plant under an Asheira tree, under the shade of an Asheira tree, vegetables in the winter, because shade is bad for it. It needs light, and if anything, the Asheira would damage it, so you're not benefiting from the Asheira. In the summer, the vegetables grown under a tree would benefit from the shade, and you're not allowed to have enough from the Asheira. Vachazivin, some type of radish or more type of some type of horseradish. There, you're never allowed to plant it under a Asheira tree. Even in the Yimashak Shamim, you're not allowed to plant it there. You're not even allowed to plant vegetables in Yimashak Shamim. Shade is bad for it. True. But there's other things that the tree will give off that benefit the growth. Because the leaves fall off the Asheira tree and they rot, and it becomes like fertilizer for the tree. So the tree benefits from the Avoda Zara. Your vegetables will benefit from the Avoda Zara tree, even in the summer, even in the winter. Therefore, you shouldn't plant it. Remember, Rabbi Yosy suffers Zeb as a garim aser. It must be Rabbi Yosy holds Zeb as a garim is also because yes, it's benefiting from the leaves that fall off the tree. But that's not the only thing that's growing this plant. There's the soil and the nutrients in the soil. So you see that it will be usher to have those vegetables, even though they only have partial influence and benefit from the leaves that fell off the tree. Yet Rabbi Yosy still says it's usher, even in the Yimashak Shalom. For Rabban Army, Zev is a very mutter. That's why they are not concerned if some leaves fall off the tree and help fertilize, because the main nutrients that the vegetables growing there are getting are from the soil. But the problem is, we actually found a different brisa that quotes them as taking the opposite perspective. It's not. Rabbi Yosy Omer, we learned the Mishnah earlier. What if you have a stone or a steel of a Zara and you need to destroy it? Rabbi Yosy Omer, shaychik v'zoyer l'rach. You just grind it up and throw it into the air, and we're not worried that it will land on someone's field and it will fertilize their field. It'll provide nutrients to their field. So Amrullah, the Chachamim told him, we learned this a couple of blot ago, that's a big problem because Afinas is Ebel. It's going to end up causing another field where these particles land to be nourished. And the Pasuk says, not have enough. So here's the point. Rabbi Yosy was not worried that some particles will land somewhere else. And he holds that as a garim is going to be mutter, because we weren't worried even if some particles provide nutrients, because wherever they fall, there's other nourishment there. Yet the Rabbi Yosy were concerned about it. Zok to Gemara, kasha the Rabban, kasha the Rabbi Yosy. Zok to Gemara, we can make a teretz. Bishlam the Rabbi Yosy like kasha, because hasam deka ozol ibud matir. You know why when you just throw it into the air, he's matir? Because you're throwing it to ibud. The chances that something's going to land someone else's field is very remote. You're trying to destroy it. But like also ibud, when a tree sheds a leaf, that's its normal function. That's not going to be bottled. And therefore, also it will be also. So as Rashi says, that the mile of hoylech liibud and loyech liibud is if it's the derech to do something. So when you're grinding up the metal, it's liibud la'abdahu mischavet. When he's destroying it and grinding it up, he's being mevatel b'avodah zara, and therefore it's considered avodah zara that you're mevatel. But when the tree sheds its leaves, which is its normal fashion, that's not mavatlet, and therefore there would be a problem of zev zagorim. So in essence, we're saying really Rabbi Yosef Yehuda holds zev zagorim, and when you ground it up and threw it into the atmosphere, that's called a bittul. So that's how we can answer the stira in Rabbi Yossi, and Zok to Gemara. El Drabanan Adrabanan Kasha. We still have a steer in the Rabbanan. By us, the Rabbanan says Sev is a Garim is mutter, and by the grinding up of the Avodah Zara, they said it was also. In fact, let's swap it around. Let's switch the sheet of the Rabbanan, and let's say that it's the Rabbanan who holds our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, our Rabbanan would hold that it would be usher to plant underneath the tree even in the winter. And Rabbi Yosef, you hold you're allowed. Then everything's consistent. Or better, let's go back to our original shot where we're not swapping it out. The Rabbi Yosef Kiddushanim. We already explained why it's not a steer in Rabbi Yosef, because when you're grinding it up, it's not even Zev Zagorim, you're Mavatal Avodah Zara. The Rabbanon, what about the steer of the Rabbanon, where the Rabbanon there seem to say Zev Zagorim is Osir, yet here they say there's no issue planting under an Asheira in the winter. K'da'amar Mari Barei Rav Khan. And that is Masha Mishpiach or Hoigim Bebasar. You have to look at the big picture. Yes, in fact, the leaves falling off the tree are benefiting the vegetables growing below because they act as fertilizer. But the shade that the tree provides is damaging. So it's a wash. There's no net benefit from the tree. So Hachanami, Masha Mishpiach, Binove, the leaves that deteriorate, whatever they help, Hoigim B'Tzel. The Mashbiach Ba'or, Poigim B'Basar, is talking about a certain Psuli B'Kachim Nifsalu. There's a certain way where you could skin it that will create a very expensive, valuable hide, but it will damage the meat. And the question is, are you allowed to do that? Because you're damaging the meat for the sake of the hide. And what the Rabbanan said was that even though it's good for the hide if you cut it in a certain way, there's no net benefit from hektish because it ruins the basar. So basically, the sheet is when you assess if something's benefiting from something else, you have to look at the full picture, not just one little snapshot. And therefore, this is not called any shvach at all from the Asheira. Zok to Gemara, but Savar Rabbi Yossi Zev is a goyim aser. So you're remaining that Rabbi Yossi holds Zev is a goyim aser, and the exception was the ground of Avodah Zara. I have a Tanya Rabbi Yossi Yomer, noitin yichur shel arlo, ve'ein noitin egois shel arlo. You're allowed to plant a branch of an orlo tree because that's not the Israel law, but you cannot plant the actual nut of Avodah Zara to plant a new tree. Because that's a pri, and the pri is also mano. From Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, Moide Rabbi Yossi Shem Nota v'Hivrich v'Hirkim Mutter. But he's moide that if you planted it or you remark of it, it will be mutter. V'Tanya Nami Hachi Moide Rabbi Yossi. Let's stop here. It's a little bit late. We'll pick up by this kasha tomorrow. Everyone should have an awesomely wonderful day.